All right, let's jump right in. We tend to think of mythology as this ancient thing, right? Stories about Zeus, Odin, the Fates, all that stuff. But what if the gods never actually left? What if their power just found a new place to live? In this explainer, we're going to look at our modern world through a totally different lens. We're going to see the systems we've built not just as tools, but as a brand new pantheon. A world where capital is what grants favor, media is what forges legends, and yeah, algorithms are what decide our fate. So it really begs the question, doesn't it? Where did all those old gods go? I mean, think about it. Ancient societies, they needed gods to make sense of things they just couldn't explain. Storms, famine, who wins a battle. But what about us? Now we can seed clouds, optimize supply chains, and run war game simulations. So did that need for an explanation just poof, disappear? Well, here's the core idea of this whole explainer. The power never disappeared. It just migrated. And what's so cool about this is how you can map the old domains to the new systems. That raw, uncontrollable power of a storm or a famine, you see that same energy today in the wild swings of the market. And what about the divine favor that decided who won a war? Well, now that's all about who controls the media and the narratives. And maybe the biggest one of all, those inescapable forces of destiny and fate? Today, that's all about networks and data. Okay, so here's the game plan for today. First, we're going to dig into this idea of the great power migration. Then, we'll get to know 3 of these new gods up close. Venture capital, which is basically the new divine favor. Then, media narratives, which is kind of like the new Mount Olympus. And finally, algorithms, our modern fates. We'll wrap it all up by talking about the consequences of having all this power and what that means for the legacy we're leaving behind. All right, first up, the great power migration. You have to remember, back in the ancient world, mythology was basically, well, it was a box to put all the powerful stuff humans couldn't understand yet. A lightning bolt? That wasn't just a discharge of static electricity. Nope. It was a thought straight from Zeus. A famine wasn't some complex ecological event. It was a punishment from the gods. These stories gave a sense of order to a really chaotic world. And this quote just nails the whole shift perfectly. See, as we got smarter, we didn't just explain these forces anymore. We started to build them. We created systems to manage money, to manage information, heck, even to manage what's considered truth. All that power that used to belong to gods and goddesses, it flowed right into the things that we built with our own hands. So, let's meet our first modern god, venture capital. And I really want you to think of it as the new divine favor. Back in the day, if you wanted a good harvest or for your new shop to succeed, you'd pray to the gods for a blessing. So, where do today's founders and innovators go to get their blessing? They go to VCs. And this is so important. It's not just about money changing hands. It's really more like a modern ritual. Entrepreneurs, they come and they offer up everything. Their ideas, their sweat, their equity, all in exchange for one thing. A powerful entity's belief that their idea will dominate the future. And that belief, once it's backed by millions of dollars, well, that's the blessing. That's what gives an idea life. The whole process even has this ritualistic feel to it. First, you have the pitch. That's basically the prayer, right? You're appealing to a higher power. Then comes the investment. That's the blessing, the moment that favor is granted. And the crazy, explosive growth that happens next, that's the miracle. That's the proof that the gods, or in this case the VCs, found your idea worthy. So you see, venture capital doesn't just fund companies. It literally decides which versions of the future are allowed to exist. Okay, moving on to our next god, media narratives. Think of this as the new Mount Olympus. Seriously. If Olympus was the place high in the clouds where the gods lived and all their dramas played out, well, our modern media landscape is exactly that. It is the stage where our modern legends are built, torn down, and sometimes made immortal. And here's the wild part. Unlike the old myths that took centuries to evolve, this stuff happens in real time. And it's usually totally intentional. This quote just hits the nail on the head. Just think of any big public figure, a CEO, an influencer, anyone. Their story, their image, their personal brand, it's all a myth, carefully built for all of us to consume. And here you can see the actual tools of this modern myth-making factory. You've got your basic ingredients, right? Repetition, framing, a captive audience, and out pop these perfectly packaged archetypes that we're all supposed to look up to. You know the ones, the visionary who can see what we can't, the disruptor who's here to break everything, or the savior who's going to rescue us all. See, the media isn't just reporting the news anymore. It's casting the gods and heroes for our time. Which brings us to our third, and maybe the most powerful and mysterious god of all, algorithms, the modern fates. If you remember your Greek myths, the fates were these three sisters, and they literally spun, measured, and snipped the thread of life for every single person. Their decisions were final, absolute. You couldn't escape them. Sound familiar at all? Because that is pretty much exactly what algorithms do today. They're these invisible judges working silently in the background of everything we do online. They're not human, they don't have a face you can argue with, and yet their judgments are shaping our reality every single second. And just look at the stuff they get to decide. They decide what counts as truth. They decide who and what gets to be seen, what's relevant and what's not. And by doing all that, they're basically handing out opportunity. And, maybe most importantly, they're controlling the flow of our attention. And in our world, attention is the ultimate currency. They're not just sorting data. They're the new arbiters of our destiny. So what happens when regular people, mortals, start playing with the power of gods? Well, that brings us to hubris, scale, and legacy. Almost every single ancient myth has a word for this, hubris, that dangerous, reckless pride that you get when you start thinking you're a god. And these weren't just bedtime stories, they were warnings. The story of Icarus flying too close to the sun with his wax wings, or Prometheus getting punished for giving fire to humans. The message was always crystal clear. When you reach for the power of the gods, you have to be ready for god-level consequences. But here's the thing that's totally different now. One word: scale. The hubris of some ancient king, yeah, it might have destroyed his city. Bad, for sure. But today, a single decision, one tweak to an algorithm, one big market trade, one narrative that goes viral can affect all 8 billion of us. And not over years, instantly. And that's the bottom line, isn't it? When the hubris scales up, the consequences scale right along with it. The potential for a mistake, for an idea to spread like a virus, for some unintended disaster, it's all magnified to a global level. The stakes of the myths we're building right now have literally never been higher. And that really forces us to look at ourselves a little differently. We're the ones building these new gods. We are the architects. Whether we mean to or not, we are actively creating the mythology that people are going to remember our era by. Which brings me to one last big question. 1,000 years from now, when people look back at us, what stories are they going to tell? Are they going to talk about gods of the harvest and the sea? Or are they going to describe this strange civilization that worshipped at the altar of capital and built machines that could think? This really just puts it all in black and white, doesn't it? The things we worship, they've changed. We swapped out prayers to the gods for this relentless pursuit of growth and innovation. We stopped seeking divine favor and started chasing influence and narrative control. And we don't look up at the stars to see our fate anymore. We look at lines of code and massive data sets. And that's really the idea I want to leave you with today. We are not gods. But the systems we've built, the markets, the media, the algorithms, they've become so powerful, so massive, and so all-encompassing that, for all intents and purposes, they are behaving like gods. We built this new pantheon. The only question left is, are they gods we actually want to live with?